Hey there, everybody. Jeff Dalick here with Our Curious World, bringing you another story of the mysterious, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. Today we're going to look at one of the more bizarre and gruesome stories out there that has figured prominently in the ongoing debate as to whether consciousness originates inside the brain or outside of it. To that point, today we're going to look at the story of Phineas Gage, a 19th century railroad worker whose on-the-job injury was so remarkable that it continues to be held up today, almost 180 years later, as a textbook example that suggests that consciousness is purely a byproduct of the brain that houses it. But is that really the case? Well, let's look at the facts. For those unfamiliar with the story, in 1848, a man named Phineas Gage was in the process of blasting a rock face to make way for a rail line near Cavendish, Vermont, when a blasting charge detonated prematurely, sending a nearly 4-foot-long, 13-pound tapping spike into the left side of his face and out through the top of his skull, and in doing so taking out a big part of his left frontal lobe in the process. Now, normally, such a gruesome accident would be instantly fatal, but for some reason Gage somehow managed to survive the experience and would even go on to live another 12 years, though permanently scarred by the incident. Here's where the story gets interesting. Though surviving the injury, it seems the accident permanently and dramatically altered his entire personality, turning him from a good and virtuous man into something of a hellion who took to drunkenness, vulgarity, physical violence, and all manner of ill behavior that eventually ended in his death a little over a decade later. This abrupt change in his behavior is heralded by the materialists as evidence that consciousness, or at least the basic personality that emerges from it, is a byproduct of the brain itself and not something that originates outside the body. Naturally, this would seem to argue against the idea that there exists a world outside of our own well-established materialistic one, from which all manner of metaphysical realities emerge. In essence, while scientists argue about whether the brain is a transmitter or a receiver of consciousness, the Gage case would seem to successfully argue for the former, thereby bringing into doubt the possibility that the human personality might survive the demise of the brain that houses it, and negating any possibility of there being some sort of a post-mortem existence. In fact, almost every atheist site uses this example in its insistence that this single life here on earth is all there is, and our suffering comes from our inability to accept that fact as reality. So they have a point. Did this single incident 178 years ago really spell the end of metaphysics and reduce everything down purely to the rational world we see around us? In effect, were the materialists right all along in our search for a larger reality, nothing more than a feeble attempt to deny our own mortality? Well, maybe so, but before we decide to close the case on immortality, let's take a closer look at this remarkable story. First, yes, it is true that poor Phineas did undergo quite a transition after his accident. It does appear that he had difficulty controlling his emotions and would become vulgar, and in the words of Dr. J.M. Harlow, the man who initially treated Gage's injuries and observed his behavior during his convalescence, that he was a man of animal possessions, the animal passions of a strong man. He further went on to write, "The equilibrium or balance between his intellectual faculties and animal propensities seemed to have been destroyed. He is fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, which was not previously his custom, manifesting but little deference for his fellows, impatient of restraint or advice when it conflicts with his desires, at times perniciously obstinate, yet capricious and vacillating." Further, he wrote that previous to his injury, although untrained in the schools, he possessed a well-balanced mind and was looked upon by those who knew him as a shrewd, smart businessman, very energetic and persistent in executing all his plans of operation. In this regard, his mind was radically changed, so decidedly so that his friends and acquaintances said he was no longer Gage. Seems to be a pretty open and shut case, and is the element of Harlow's extensive writing on the man is the most often quoted by the materialists as evidence that the personality is a byproduct of the brain and not the other way around. However, there are a few caveats that are often overlooked. First, it should be noted that Harlow had never met Gage prior to the accident, so anything he had to say about the man's previous personality was second-hand at best, and hearsay at worst. While proponents of the materialistic theory contend that he was a good and decent man beforehand, there is simply no way to determine whether this is true or not. Additionally, it is often the case that people will speak more highly of another once that individual has undergone some sort of grievous injury than they might otherwise be inclined to opine. As such, for all we know, Gage might have been something of a hellion before the accident, but such was largely overlooked out of respect for his injury. Most likely, growing up as a common laborer in the early 19th century would have made him a tough, resilient, and probably a little rough around the edges, as opposed to the docile and gentle lamb many make him out to have been. That's not to say he was a crude and abrasive man before the accident, but like most people, whatever negative impulses lied within the darkest corners of his mind were likely kept in check exactly in the same way we all do this every day in our lives. That's what the frontal lobe is for. It keeps us from acting upon those darker elements of our psyche that would be likely to be detrimental and even destructive. We all have a dark side that we keep buried. It only emerges when we might have too much to drink or experiencing excessive stress, or, as is often the case, when one is in the throes of advanced dementia and lose the ability to keep their dark side securely, safely inside its box. And that's just what may have happened to Mr. Gage. He lost most of his frontal lobe, and with it, the ability to restrain his more base nature. In other words, it's not that he was no longer Gage, as his previous coworkers are recorded as observing, but that now he was what the real Gage would have been like without a frontal lobe to control his behavior. In that respect, then, his behavior may not have been any different than ours would be under identical circumstances. Secondly, it should be noted that according to most reports, this abrasive behavior he was exhibiting in the immediate aftermath of his accident was largely temporary. According to the writings of another physician who studied Gage, one H.J. Bigelow, an American surgeon and professor of surgery at Harvard University, he found that Gage's behavior and certainly his intellectual capacity was not markedly different than before. At least that appears to have been the case by the time he had examined Gage around a year after the accident. Of course, he hadn't been present during the early months of Gage's recovery, so he may not have witnessed the worst of it. On the other hand, Bigelow was far more qualified a physician than Harlow, who was a proponent of phrenology, the now described belief that the shape of the skull determined a person's personality, skills, and capabilities. That was popular in the 19th century, and so his observations should carry more weight. Whichever is the case, however, it appears that by all accounts, within a couple of years of the accident, Gage was fully functional and even capable of holding a full-time job, a fact that was demonstrated when in August of 1852 he found work in Chile as a long-distance stagecoach driver, which is a fairly taxing and even dangerous job that he performed admirably for the next 7 years. Unfortunately, his health began failing in 1859, and he returned to San Francisco, where he was cared for by his mother and sister up to the time of his death from epilepsy in May of 1860 at the age of 36. This last bit is often omitted by most proponents of the brain as transmitter of consciousness school of thought, who prefer the established mythology that Gage was a violent drunkard who beat his wife and children, even though Gage was never married or had children, was constantly in trouble with the law, and was a generally horrible person to be around. Well, obviously he had troubles after his accident, and there was a marked change in his personality. He was nowhere near the psycho so many are keen to assume. He was not the same man as he was before, 'tis true, but then are any of us the same person we were 10, 20, or even 30 years ago, even without a metal spike having penetrated our skull? According to Malcolm Macmillan, a Gage expert and the author of the 2000 book An Odd Kind of Fame, the stories of Phineas Gage, his exhaustive research on the man maintains that most accounts of Gage are almost always distorted and exaggerate his behavioral changes well beyond anything described by those who had direct contact with him. It seems that over the years, the story of Phineas Gage was taken on a life of its own, accruing details and novel additions that are entirely fictional or is largely based on hearsay. Unfortunately, people are quick to accept information that confirms their own suppositions while ignoring that which challenges those same suppositions. It's called confirmation bias, and it's a big part of human nature, I guess, but what you going to do? So what does that mean for the current source of the consciousness debate? Well, nothing really. We already know that damaging the brain can result in all manner of changes in one's personality. That's the whole point behind lobotomies, and the most noticeable and unfortunate element of late-stage dementia. Whether that demonstrates that the personality is a byproduct of the brain or not remains a source of considerable debate, and one that is unlikely to be resolved soon. However, if the brain is not a transmitter of consciousness, but is actually a receiver of it, in much the same way a radio receives radio waves, then damaging the brain is the equivalent of damaging a radio. The radio is still picking up signals, but now the signal is distorted and as such markedly different from what it was producing before. I doubt that will convince the confident skeptic, but it should be enough to make the rest of us who don't live in such a world of certainty appreciate that there may be more going on in terms of unseen worlds than we have yet to discover. And so the debate continues. Say, if you like this video, I'd really appreciate if you hit that like button and consider subscribing to see more stories like this from our curious world. It'll really help me out, and you'll feel better about yourself afterwards. Here's your final thought of the day. Not only is the world more remarkable than you can imagine, it is more remarkable than you ever could imagine. Bye for now.